Hi, this is Dave Redder. This is project 3 in my series of designing and building software and describes how to use the project that we created at the end of project 2, which was simply to create a blank Windows Forms project or application and to embellish it ever so slightly with what you see here, the hello world, and run it to see if we got anything. And then, if you'll recall, we did get rid of Team Explorer because we're not going to use it. And then we talked about some of these things here. We did not get rid of this data source window, and we'll get rid of it because we're not going to use it now, but we will use it later. And we'll keep this, which is called the toolbox. If any of these things that I'm expecting to use don't appear on your screen, you can come up to View, usually, and find the thing that you want. And in this case, there's the toolbox. So if I happen to not have the toolbox available, I could come to View, find Toolbox in here, and click on it, and it would come back to us. So this is essentially where we left off. If you want to check that, you'll remember that on this we set the center position to center screen, and the title bar has the string hello world with that formatting in it. And running it pops that thing up right here, and as you can see, there's nothing going on with this form other than those things that you get for free. In particular, this thing gives you some of the common things that you'll get on that icon in that position, the same as this one in Visual Studio. This reduces it, and this brings it back, which you couldn't see, but I just clicked on the icon for it at the bottom of the screen in the taskbar, and its view is the same as this. Its image is the same as that, and I can close it with this. So at that point then, I'm back to where I started. Fair warning that sometimes when you have the app running, there will be things that you try to do that you can't do while it's running. And it'll pop an error up and tell you it can't do it. It's not always good to the extent that it doesn't always tell you what the reason is. It just says, no, I can't do that. So be prepared for that. So that's where we stand. And what I want to do now is to make an app that looks like this. This is from a different invocation of Visual Studio. And all I want it to do is to just be hello world, which simply says, I know how to do some stuff enough to make it say hello world. So the goal is to have this button. This is just a Windows button that I click on. And when I click on it, it puts hello world in this text box. This object right here is what's called a label. So I have a label, I have a text box, and I have a say hello world. If you'll notice when I'm clicking here, now I'm going to type in here, and it doesn't allow me to type anything in that box, and that's because I've specified not to let that happen. So we're going to do all those pieces here in a pretty short amount of time, and hopefully you'll get the ability to create simple Windows forms very quickly. I built the application. I put that title in the title bar, and I put it on center screen as the startup position. What I want to do now is to put these controls that you see here, that's what these guys are called, controls, on the form. And that's what the toolbox is for. Here are common controls in the toolbox. And the first one I want to put on there is the label. So there's the label. But of course it doesn't know what you want it to be called. But if you look down here, in the same way that we found Form 1 in the title for the form, when the label is selected, we get label 1, which is what it says right there in the text property. So I'm just going to simply change that to greeting. And now when I click off of that or press enter, you'll notice that it says greeting up here. Now there are a lot of little nuances in the way Microsoft has implemented this, giving you some help that you may not notice, or that you might notice and not know what it's about. I also want to have a text box, so I'm just going to drag this text box from here up to here, and I could drop it right there or anywhere I want. But notice if I get up here next to greeting, I get this blue bar across the top, which means that the top of the word greeting, at the top of that label, is at the top of that text box. And if I scoot it up just ever so slightly, you'll see that there's a purple line. That's called the baseline. And the baseline of the text in the label will then be at the same level, same area as the baseline in the greeting. I can grab these little squares at the end, they're called handles, and I can move them left and right. We're not going to deal with this, but it does pop up with a little text box task. If you make it multi-line, it allows you to scooch it up and down and have multiple lines in the text box. But we're not going to use that. So now I've got this greeting, this text box, and all I need is a button. So I'm going to go grab a button. And the button is right here. I'm going to grab it, drop it down there. And I want the text on the button, if you'll recall, to say hello world. So that's what I'm going to put in there. And I'm going to do it by modifying the button's text property. And I do that down here with the button selected. I have the ability to change where it says button 1 to hello world, or say hello world. So here we go. Say hello world. And then I'll press enter. And unfortunately the button isn't big enough to contain that text. But that's not a big problem. I'll use one of these sizing handles and I'll scooch it across there. With buttons you can go both ways no matter what. So if I want to show somebody a button that they can see, make it as big as you want. So I'll make that one about that size. Notice also that we can do other things. For example, I can change the font by coming up here to font and telling it that I'd really like to have that to be a 14 point. And that, of course, changes how big of a word we can, or string we can fit on there. But we can adjust all of these things. And I can grab it when I get that four-headed arrow and move the thing. Notice that it tries to move it to align with various pieces that are on the form. So we're not going to mess with that. I'm just going to leave that like that. And I've got these three things to deal with now. Now, everything ought to have a name. And each of these things does have a name. And in fact, if I click out here so that the form is selected, and you can tell because the sizing handles are on the form, and I come up here, you'll see that there's a name field. And it says the name of the form is Form 1. If I had 7 forms on an app, one of them would be called Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, Form 4. And before too long, you end up in a situation where you can't remember what item is what. So it makes sense to give them meaningful names. My naming convention is to use, this is an old naming convention, but it's served me very well. M underscore form, FRM, form hello world. That's what I'm going to call that form. And now it has changed the name of the form, including in all the code. This label I'm going to call M underscore, again, member underscore label greeting. And you'll see why I'm naming them this way at a later time. And then here I've got M underscore text box greeting. There's a reason that I chose to use this kind of indicator, this TB or LBL, because on this one, it's TB means text box, LBL means label, and I can tell the difference between them when I need to, and I'll show you where that pops up. And this one I'm going to call a button. Again, M underscore button, say hello world. There's pretty much no limit on the length of these things. You can do what you need. Also, you can use whatever naming convention you like. My advice is to do it consistently. Come up with a naming convention and do it consistently, and I'll show you some reasons for mine as we go through all of these videos. So, let's run this thing. And as you can see, I've got the actual running form in front of me now. And the idea is that, like on this form, clicking on Say Hello World puts Hello World in the greeting box. Well, let's leave that right there. Yeah, it's going to go away. I'll bring it back when we need. One of the problems with this is that I can type in something like that. That's an old phrase, goodbye cruel world. And I shouldn't be able to, because in this one, if you'll recall, I can select that stuff, but I can type and it doesn't modify it. So I want to make sure that this particular text box doesn't allow that. If you look down in the properties, you'll see something where it says read. Oh, I've got the wrong one here. This is the text box. It says read only. And they're alphabetical if that's the way you want them. If you click that button, read only is right there, and I can pick true. But it says it's invalid. If you'll recall, when we started, it just says the property is not valid. If you click on details, it says can't be modified in the designer while building or debugging. So I need to stop this application from running. There it is running right now. And I need to stop it. And you can click that red stop debugging button. Now when I change that to true, which you can also do by double clicking it on a binary field, a true false field, now it's true. And so when I run this now, you'll see that I can't type in there. So the next thing that I want to do is to notice that when I click on say hello world, nothing happens. And the reason is we haven't told it what to happen. What we need to do is to respond to the event that occurs when the user clicks on a button. And Visual Studio sets this up so that there is a thing, an actual thing called an event that gets fired when the event occurs, and it causes a specific piece of code to be executed, and you have to write that piece of code. Well, fortunately, there are some really good shortcuts here. If we look over here, these are the events that are available. And you'll see there's a lot of them, a whole bunch of events here, in fact. And in fact, there's this click event right there. There's also one down here called mouse click. It's hard to keep track of which one is the one you want to deal with. So what I'm going to do is not use either one of them. I'm just going to come back over here where we were and use the shortcut for it, which says in the designer, I can double click on a button and it will write the code for me and take me to it and allow me then to write it's empty code, but to cause the thing I want to happen when the say hello world button gets clicked, to write that code. This is called an event handler. So what I'm doing is telling the event handler what to do when the event, which is the click event on the hello world, is raised. So what do I want to do? Well, what I want to do is I want to take whatever this is, I want to say hello world, and put hello world up in here. But I need to find some code to do that. And I need to have the names of these things. Now, remember back where I showed you a name, M underscore something? I want to take the name M underscore TB greeting, and I want to put it in here. In IntelliSense, if I do this, M underscore, look at it. All of those things that I created are right there for me. And there's the one I want, M underscore TB text box greeting. And the text box has a property associated with it. And that property is the text property. Just like the form, just like the label. And I want to change that text to hello world. So that's going to happen every time I click the hello world button. So now let's take a chance at running it. And there it is. And I click on say hello world, and there it is. How can I know that that's really what's happening? Well, it didn't happen until I put this piece of code in there. But there's another way we can do it as well. I've stopped it because I clicked the X in the upper right hand corner on the form. But if I come over here and in that gray bar, I click on this, and this is just one thing. We'll use this a lot later, but this is one example of how this works. This is called a breakpoint. And if I click on this button, it came to that breakpoint. It means it came to this method right here, went to execute this, and didn't, but rather stopped there so we could go snoop around a little bit. So if I continue there, then it will do this and say hello world. There's our first app, a nice simple hello world app using Windows Forms in the Visual Studio Community Edition and writing the code in the C# language. So that's all, and I will hope to talk to you again soon in Project 4.